Hi, and thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Asia Gaming Brief face-to-face series. I'm speaking today with Dr. Brett Abarbanel, Director of Research at the UNLV International Gaming Institute. Dr. Abarbanel's research has covered traditional gambling and esports/video gaming, and today we're going to be talking about the convergence between the two, specifically as it relates to game design. Brett, thanks for joining us and welcome.
Thanks so much, Felix. It's great to be here.
So the topic that we're discussing is an interesting one and something that you've brought to our attention. You mentioned before that the line between gambling games and video game, traditional video gaming, that those lines are blurring. Can you talk us through a little bit of that?
Sure. Let me start with a little bit of disambiguation. This is the Asia Gaming Brief. I work at the International Gaming Institute, but we're talking about gambling. And what we do is really underneath the gambling umbrella. And we've had this big discursive shift, to use our fancy academic terms, over the past 20 years or so into the use of this phrase, right? Gaming now is used to talk about commercial gambling in a way that was unheard of maybe 20, 30 years ago. So when I talk about gaming, I'm talking about games and video games, right? So this is the idea in which the outcomes are determined predominantly by skill. So something like Street Fighter or something like a MOBA or League of Legends, right? And then when we talk about gambling, and I'm going to try and do my best to keep the terms separate, I still, despite all I do all day, every day, interchange them. Let's talk about gambling, right? This is the outcomes are determined predominantly or even entirely by chance. So this is what we think of as, casino games, card games, sports betting, or other forms of betting, really in which there's an opportunity to win something of value. So when we think about all the different ways that games and gambling exist in our lives, we think about things like social casino games, esports and video gaming, which we're really going to, I think, focus on here, virtual reality, things like in-game payments and different payment systems. Lots of these familiar activities that we have in our everyday lives use elements of both gambling and gaming. One of the most prolific examples of this, Felix, is one that you and I have talked about a bit in the past, and that's loot boxes.
Yeah.
Loot boxes are definitely the most public of this gambling and gaming crossover. And it's really caught the public eye because it's been in mainstream media. It's not just showing up in like pop culture media, right? Or specialized media just for people who are in the gambling industry or in the gambling world. It's something that even, legislators and regulators in jurisdictions all over the world have started paying attention to. But this is really like the tip of the iceberg. This is something where the idea that gambling might exist in video games and that these gaming features might exist in gambling games has really become quite prolific. We talked a bit about skill-based gaming in the past, you and I. Well, that's something that certainly these skill-based gambling machines have started to appear on the casino floor. You may have seen, for example, at last year's G2E, and I think at G2E Asia they went as well, the Pac-Man game, which is a skill-based game where you're playing an arcade game for money, right? There's first-person shooter games with zombies that you can play. The latest that I've seen is this claw game, reminiscent of at least our old-school arcades, and certainly that is extremely popular in Asia, right? Definitely in Taiwan. I have walked down entire streets, right, of the claw game, and that's now set up as a gambling type game in casinos. I don't know yet how successful it will be. Time will tell. But then as we move more into the digital space, that's also somewhere where we're seeing really these gamified gambling type things. Crypto gambling, for example, has developed out of the intersection of online games and cryptocurrency and other blockchain platforms. Like investing in the stock market really found its day in the sun as a gambling product spurred on by broad access through groups like Robinhood, right? I mean, if we go back, I can't believe it's been almost 10 months, but to the beginning of the year, when the GameStop to the moon phenomenon really started. And that's gambling. And then the gamification element that shows up in there is with some of these apps. I make a trade and little, digital fireworks go off on my phone. Congratulations, you made a trade. This is very exciting. As though people haven't been doing this in financial markets for hundreds of years. So the way that it's not necessarily always a new thing that shows up, but there's lots of new applications and innovations of old things, as well as these new phenomena that make it so interesting to see where gambling and gaming are coming together.
Yeah. So you mentioned skill-based gaming. You also mentioned, seeing gambling elements in video games, right? To me, it kind of feels like the two of them are really slowly kind of creeping closer and closer together. But I guess my question is, where's that middle line? Where's the point where something remains a video game and versus something that is, purely and defined as a gambling game?
So that is such a great question. I don't think there's a line. I think it's, we can't think of things in terms of black and white. It's a huge spectrum. So that line is just like this giant gray middle zone where things kind of start to cross over. Perhaps you're even in a situation where you've got like a 50-50 before you can deviate out again to see what is gaming and what is gambling. So for example, on the pure gaming side, you're talking about something that is purely skill-based. Something like, it's tough to even to give an example, right? I would say chess. But if you play chess, what happens at the very beginning of the game?
Somebody makes a move, right?
What color are you? Do you get black? Right? So that's chance. So in a way, there's that element of chance that gets involved as well. But chess is still the example I like to give when you think about something on the far end of skill. And then on the other end, pure chance. A lottery, a slot game, these are where you don't have any control out of the outcome. Then we start to go into the middle where perhaps there's that mix. Maybe we have a video game where things are mostly skill-based, but we also have the chance of who are you going to draw against to compete for your competition. Maybe you have an avatar who has certain skills and those skills have a range. So maybe you hit within that range. It might be a death blow if you hit at the top of that range, but it's not if you hit at the bottom of that range. And then maybe your opponent gets strong enough to beat you. And if you'd hit at the top of that range, you never would have gotten there. So there's all these different little functions. They all tend to center around chance, right? There's what's the RNG in the game? And it's really tough to say what's on one side and what's on the other. Having said that, of course, there's real ramifications for this. It all boils down to, is this gambling, right? Do we determine this as gambling? Because that then is how we decide, is this something that falls underneath regulations? Do you need a license for it? Do you need a license for it in one place, but not in another? Do you have different restrictions then that you have to put on the game? And so you really, really quickly kind of devolve into this spiral of questions that makes it really difficult to have kind of such a big gray middle in this concept.
So just with all this, I really want to get your thoughts, on the future of game design. From me, and I mentioned before that my last time I went to Vegas was probably two years ago, I think now, 3 years ago because of the pandemic. But I mean, has it moved forward? Do you feel like skill-based games still has a place within that kind of wider offering of gambling games?
I would say there's still opportunity for skill-based games. I think it's something that sits along that spectrum of gambling and gaming, the way that these currently exist. So much of the way that we consume almost everything in our everyday life has transitioned more into a digital space rather than a brick and mortar space. And so these skill-based games like those that you're talking about, they kind of exist in this middle ground. They're in a land-based brick and mortar casino, but they really rely on the design and function from a digital space. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't translate into a slot type cabinet, but it does mean that those who would be most familiar with the game might not necessarily be those who are seeking it out in a land-based setting. They might prefer to play it in a mobile setting. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for this skill-based game. And I'm really curious to see how in the future this might continue to evolve. It might be something that we see that's part of a casino floor mix, but equally, and in my opinion, more likely, we're going to see it evolve more into a digital setting where we can do it on our own computer or on our own mobile phones.
And that makes a lot of sense, because I think a lot of the games that they look like are games that we have played on our phone. Like that was the slingshot kind of Angry Bird style one I saw a few years ago, right? This is something that I was used to playing it on my phone, and then walking into a Las Vegas casino and then seeing it in a cabinet. I feel like I'm playing on a really large phone, which makes it really awkward, because I had sort of a similar game on my phone itself. But you're right. Like I think that they haven't been given the right opportunity to flourish, and we can't make a judgment on it until we actually see it in what I feel like it should be its natural habitat.
Yeah, and I think that that's a very good point. That's how we all would like to be judged, right? Within the scope of our own perspectives and our own merits, and not necessarily based on how we've been pushed into certain boxes. And I think that that's something that's relevant far beyond the scope, really, of gambling, right? We make a very philosophical point here that we need to be in the correct environment in order to flourish.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Brett, for your time today. I know it's getting late for you, and it's early for me, but appreciate your time as always.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much, Felix.
And that was Dr. Brett Abarbanel, Director of Research at the UNLV International Gaming Institute, where we talked about the increasingly blurred lines between video gaming and gambling game design. Tune in to each week's face-to-face series, where we speak to the industry's leading experts.